Okay, welcome back. We're on page 22. We're just finishing up the discussion about how you're really supposed to be eliminating steps with the people and procedures, and that traditional paper policies is really the prime area for automation. All right, next we're going to be talking about some of the kind of systems that happen. So, transaction processing systems, TPS. Okay, that's a big thing, and that fits at the very bottom of that information pyramid. Now, you guys, has everyone seen the movie called Office Space? You remember that movie? And the manager would come up and say, "Now you remember you need to have a cover sheet on your TPS report." That's what they were talking about. TPS, transaction processing system. Okay, so a TPS is essentially an automated system at the lower level. It's more focused on gathering data. Oh, sure, they do some processing and some reporting, but not much. Think about a time card system, okay? So I'm submitting my timesheets at the end of the day, and it includes, what project I worked on, for accounting purposes, and how many hours, and whether or not I used any equipment or tools or something that had to go along with it. So, as I go from customer to customer, I fill out more and more of this information. So at the end of the day, I turn in my timesheet. That is a TPS. It's gathering information from the user. And sure, there's an awful lot of processing. It's going to come back and say, well, that's not a valid account. Like I transpose a number. Or, you exceeded whatever it is, 16 hours in a day. That probably not right. You probably made a math error. So there's some processing in there. And you can do some reports, but you don't really make decisions based upon that. So TPS is one of those low-level things. By the way, this phrase they use in the book over and over again. Whatever the term is, an organization, a collection of people, procedures, software, databases, and devices used to, that part stays the same, perform and record business transactions. So another transaction processing system would be like a shopping cart on a website where you're buying stuff, okay? So that's a transaction processing. Okay. All right, the next one, talking about, and by the way, there's a reason why they show this image here. This image here is basically, don't bother to read it. That's not what it's about. What it's about is to show you how complex things can be. Some of these transaction processing systems have to be integrated in order for them to work, because you couldn't have a time card system over here and a payroll system over here and an accounting system over here. They really need to be all integrated together, because otherwise you'll just go crazy. So the only real thing about this is there's multiple systems. There's revenue, there's management. All these systems are all integrated together in some sort of a system. Okay, so integration. All right. So, enterprise planning, an ERP. Now, this is big stuff. It's still kind of sort of at the bottom, slightly above the TPS, but still on that bottom rung in the information pyramid. Now, so ERP is a company, a vendor would come in and tell you, we're going to do all of your business. If you buy our product, we're going to do all the TPS stuff. We're going to take care of all of your accounting, taxes. We're going to do everything. It's a complete business system. And these suckers are often, like the SAP, the example they talk about here. We're talking about millions of dollars when people come into these big companies and implement an ERP. Now, the ERP vendors typically include almost all the other things we talked about. They almost always include like the TPS kind of things, and the management information system, the one that was on the pyramid a little higher. So an ERP typically is much, much broader than this one scale. But for purposes of this conversation, we're going to assume that ERP actually fits on top of the TPS. Okay, so it's the key to an ERP is the fact that it's all integrated together. So what happens if they're not integrated together? Let's talk about that for a minute. So I'll give you a real world example. So let's say that you're living with your girlfriend and she's got some magazine, and you decide to move. So you pack up and move, and so she sends a note to the magazine company saying, I've moved. And so they enter it into their system, and the next time you get 2 magazines, one for the old address and one for the new address. And let's say, hypothetically, that you get married and she changes her last name, which is obviously not a requirement, but hey, give me a break. I'm just talking the story. So she sends a note again saying, by the way, my name has changed. So now she's getting 3 magazines. The old name at the old address, the old name at the new address, and the new name at the new address. Now, this is a real world scenario. And what happened is, the accounting people who took the call to make sure didn't really talk with, the distribution people, And so therefore there's a disconnect. If they had an integrated system and they only had one database, not 3 or 4 databases scattered around that have to talk to each other. If they had one central thing, I would go in and I would change the address one time. One time for billing, and it would also change it for the shipping address. It would done it once and once forever. So, I can always tell when companies don't have an integrated system. Alright, so going up the chain a little bit more, they talk about management information systems. So, management information system is, again, this is another cool little diagram showing you the necessity of having just a common database. So, like the TPS is feeding this thing, and all your financial information and managerial information, manufacturing, marketing, all that come from a single database. Okay. Now, admittedly, this is in the context of an MIS, but the big picture is what we're actually talking about. Okay. So, the idea is that management information system pulls information from the TPS, and typically here's where you make decisions. Okay, you don't make decisions from the TRP. I mean the TPS report, and so the ERP, using the most classic definition of an ERP, meaning that it's integrated and it fits above the TPS. There'll be some decisions in there, but not an awful lot. The MIS is where people sit back and write queries and say, well, let's compare the efficiency from shift 1 to shift 2. And then say, well, we need more training, or we need to do this and do that. It's designed to help managers do these what-if drills. Okay, that's what management information system. And the typical output of an MIS is reports, okay? And they could be simple reports like the overtime report, to see who's perhaps abusing overtime, or sick leave report, things of that nature. Okay, up the chain a little bit more is the decision support system. So there are specialized systems that are designed specifically to help you decide to do something. Okay, here's a classic example. Let's say I'm building a new gadget and I want to sell it, and I don't really have a clue how much to charge for this thing. I really need a lot of help. I need a system that's going to go out there and look at the other vendors to see what they're charging, see what the trends are, if they're going up, going down, how does my product differentiate from the other, where's the added value that from a customer's point of view, what's my market share, what's my loyalty, blah, 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 blah. It's a heck of a lot of stuff in there. And not all of that decision-making stuff came from inside my own company. So the decision support systems, yes, they gather information from, the MIS and the TPS and the ERP, but they also gather information from other sources to help, specialize. And these typically are not open-end systems. You could have a decision support system for making a price point. You could have a decision support system for specifically designed to where to put the next store you're going to build. Specialized decision support systems. Okay. All right. So a typical answer coming out of a decision support system is like, should I add a second shift? I'm going to reduce the amount. I'm working too much overtime. If I had a second shift, I would reduce the amount of overtime, but I'm going to have to pay benefits. And you see how this kind of gets complicated? So you really need some help rather than just an Excel spreadsheet that helps you make a decision on whether or not you need to start a second shift because overtime on the first shift is too high. Okay, let's continue. So this thing's called the specialized software. And I'm going to skip some of this stuff. So this one's called knowledge management. So knowledge management systems are things that are kind of weird. Knowledge management system doesn't really fit very well in the information pyramid because knowledge management systems are designed for the low-level worker. Let's say, for example, that, I don't know, something silly. You're operating a sewer treatment plant. Okay, how's that for a silly example? And you're a low-level employee. And you get a reading on some gauge that says that, this particular impurity is too high. And what you really want to do is to call up the old guy who's been there for 30 years and say, hey, the dissolved oxygen is too low. What am I supposed to do? Okay? And so he's going to tell you, well, you turn this knob or you add this chemical or you do something, okay? But instead of calling the old guy and ask him, they have these knowledge management systems. So you type in the description of what's happening, and it's going to come back and tell you, aha, most likely the problem is this. You need to add this chemical or change this delay time or whatever it is that you need to do. So having it fit in the top tier of the information pyramid is kind of inappropriate. It really kind of belongs kind of towards the bottom because everyone gets to use. In fact, the lowest level person in your company is going to be using these knowledge management systems. Unlike in the traditional use of the pyramid, senior management, the guy at the bottom is probably not going to be running an MIS to decide where to build another store, right? That's going to be senior management. Well, knowledge management isn't quite like that. Okay, so they have this knowledge management system. They have expert systems, and that's all kind of cool. Artificial intelligence. There's this cool little thing here talking about the branches of artificial intelligence. And obviously, artificial intelligence is not near as good as it is on TV and science fiction. So, robotics, vision system, natural language, learning, neural networks, and expert systems. Those are the kind of things. So, an expert system would be you go to the doctor and he types in all the symptoms. Well, you have a rash and you've got bumps and your temperature is spiking, and so he types in all this kind of stuff, and then presto changeo, it comes back and says Lyme disease or whatever the scenario is. So expert systems are designed to help you, and it's all a part of artificial intelligence. And we're going to have some really cool things to talk about with artificial intelligence a little bit later. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is kind of off the subject. We're going to be talking about how systems are developed. And so there's this thing called the software, the system development life cycle, SDLC. And this is kind of how it works. Now, in traditional circles, there's 5 parts to the SDLC. It doesn't exactly follow this diagram, so just bear with me. So the investigation phase. So the investigation phase is trying to figure out what it is that needs to be done. Because once again, you don't just want to go out and upgrade things. You have to have a valid business need. And so you have to kind of sort of think, well, what needs to be done? And then you have to analyze the problem. So investigation is going to come up with 15 things that you think are suitable projects. Analysis is going to be digging in a little bit deeper and trying to find out, what is it that I have to do to make this thing come out? And then you're going to design it. And designing is where it costs a lot of money because you're spending, here you're just doing stuff on paper, designing it. And then you're going to have the implementation. And the implementation is where you build it, you test it, you do the full implementation. And that's why they kind of combine these things together. Develop, implement, and integrate, in my world, is all one thing. And then you have operations and maintenance. And that just means the daily operation of your system. What's it take? Do you have to, go in and clean out tables? Do you have to do something and to maintain the system? Do you have to go re-index a table periodically? Okay, this is a good place to stop for the 15-minute mark. We'll pick this thing up again in just a few.